Comic books have been around for a long time, as have the characters in them. Nothing makes you feel older than rereading something and realizing that it came out 10 years ago. Oh god, I'm old. Impending mortality aside, we still need explanations as to how these characters are still active and probably going to outlive us all. This leads to the employment of retroactive continuity, or retcon for short. Now, I appreciate you for still watching, as you probably clicked on this video hoping for a history on the Black Widow and ended up contemplating your own short lifespan instead. But I have a good reason for that little intro, as the Black Widow has been subjected to many such retcons to keep her young and active, while I begin experiencing back pain and chronic headaches. From the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you probably have an idea of the Black Widow as an amazing secret agent with a dark past she wants to atone for. And you would be partially right, but she certainly didn't start out like that. So, without any further ado, this is the history of the Black Widow. The Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, made her debut in Tales of Suspense number 52 as an Iron Man villain. She was less skillful secret agent, more charming seductress who relied on henchmen to get the job done. Not that she ever succeeded. Her early exploits included tricking Hawkeye into fighting Iron Man, not the most difficult task, and eventually switching sides because of Hawkeye's devotion towards her. Aww. She would team up with the Avengers a few times, and during one of those times she would encounter the Red Guardian, who turned out to be her husband, Alexei Shostakov, who would sacrifice himself for her. After this incident, she would try to leave the superhero life, and Hawkeye as well. However, she would get bored with the quiet life and decide to return to a life of action. She got herself a new outfit, the one most of you are familiar with, and then go beat up Spider-Man, because that's how you become a hero in the Marvel Universe. She would next feature in a series called Amazing Adventures, a double feature with the Inhumans of all people. This is where the Black Widow is at her most unrecognizable, as most of her stories involved her getting driven around in a limo to various places where she would fight crime. The stories are okay at best, but this series did give us the one prominent supporting character in Nat's life, Ivan Petrovich. After her stint in Amazing Adventures ended, she ended up migrating over to Daredevil, where she became a supporting character and love interest for a while, before they broke it off, though the two still cared deeply for one another. She was then made part of the Champions, which was basically Marvel taking a bunch of existing characters that weren't part of any current title at the time, and just putting them in a single book. Naturally, it didn't last. Natasha's next major story was in the appropriately titled Bizarre Adventures. It's not great. While there was a lot of action, the story ends with Nat getting mansplained by some dude in a fedora about how the spy biz works. Yeah. The only notable thing about the story is Paul Gulassi's art. But the writer of that story, Ralph Macchio, no, not that one, would immediately redeem himself with the next major Black Widow story taking place in the pages of Marvel Fanfare. This is where, finally, the Black Widow everyone recognizes takes shape. We get some backstory for Natasha, where it's revealed that she was orphaned in World War II and was raised by Ivan. She showed extreme proficiency in the martial arts from an early age, which did not go unnoticed. She would meet Alexei, and after his death was faked, she chose to become a Soviet agent. This would remain her origin story for a while. As for the story taking place in the present, it involves Nat going on a mission for S.H.I.E.L.D. to rescue her mentor, Ivan, or kill him if need be. This story is high action and spy thrills all the way through, and a high recommendation if you're interested in the Black Widow. But for those of you wanting something with a more emotional depth, we have Black Widow, Coldest War, which is a story in which Natasha is approached by Soviet agents who reveal that her husband had survived his supposed death, and they would reunite her with him for a price. This is also an excellent story as we delve into Natasha's emotional state while also being an excellent spy thriller. After a few minor stories involving terrorist, a serial killer telepath, an immortal vigilante, and a Nazi grandma, as well as a longer and more significant stint with the Avengers, the next major phase for our Black Widow came under the pen of Devin Grayson. From this story onwards, Natasha's characterization seems to be that of a harder, no-nonsense woman. She knows that she's done terrible things in the past and will probably do worse in the future, but understands that it's a necessary evil. This is a characterization that is honestly up to personal preference, so what I find tolerable, you might find deplorable, and vice versa. Anyway, in Devin Grayson's first story, Itsy Bitsy Spider, we are introduced to a new Black Widow, Yelena Belova, who blindly believes the doctrine fed to her by her handlers and thinks that she's a hero. Natasha has no patience for this rookie and proceeds to change her worldview in the next story, appropriately titled Breakdown. For this story, David Grayson is joined by Greg Rucka to break Yelena using the plot of all things, the movie Face Off. You know, the Nicolas Cage one. Natasha does succeed in turning Yelena away from the spy business, but the reader is left questioning Nat's actions throughout the entire story. Next up, we have acclaimed British author Richard Morgan, who takes the time to expand the ideas Grayson and Rucka introduced, most notably, the Red Room. This is where we get our second major retcon, this one about how Natasha remained youthful throughout all these years. The Red Room performed experiments on her so that she would retain her beauty as well as her skills as a secret agent. Morgan probably shows the most brutal version of the Black Widow so far, while simultaneously showing us one of the most driven, and in her own way, heroic versions as well. Meanwhile, in the mainstream Marvel Universe, Nat sided with Tony Stark in the Civil War, joined his Avengers for a while, and encounters a recently unbrainwashed Bucky, who it's revealed in another retcon, had a thing with Natasha back in his Winter Soldier days. In her next series, by writer Paul Cornell, an attempt is made to bring all these retcons together in a way that makes sense, and it kinda succeeds at that. But it adds another retcon in where it's revealed that Nat's mentor Ivan was for her all this time, and after realizing he could never have her, activates a protocol where everyone who came in contact with her would die. And he becomes a cyborg. I hate this, because Ivan becomes just another victim of the supporting character curse, meaning they tend to die or go evil to give the main character angst. It also changes Ivan from being caring to creepy, and as someone who read stories where he was caring, seeing this turn completely out of nowhere is just... Anyway, moving on. The Black Widow next gets a series in the Heroic Age that lasts for 8 issues. The first 6 deal with a conspiracy, and the last 3 deal with a different conspiracy, which gets concluded in a different miniseries called Widowmaker. I know that was brief, but honestly, it's just your standard Black Widow stuff. Old enemies, old friends, and a bunch of idiots underestimating Nat, which honestly works to her advantage. I should mention that the last conspiracy was masterminded by the formerly dead, now alive ex-husband of the Black Widow, Alexei. Next up, we have the runs of Edmondson Noto, as well as Mark Waid and Chris Samney, both of which seem to go in the direction of Black Widow equals Marvel's James Bond. And just like the last few stories, these also deal with huge conspiracies. As someone who had to read a lot of Black Widow before a deadline, it can get quite tedious. Especially in the Wade Samney run, where the villains are extremely ineffective, and Nat herself acts extremely colder than she ever has before. In other things taking place outside her title series, Secret Empire had happened, and Natasha is killed by Nazi Cap. I'm not elaborating anymore on that, just know that Secret Empire was terrible. Nat is frankly at her worst here, telling a bunch of young supers that they have to become killers, before realizing that, hey, isn't corrupting young kids with potential into assassins something I should really be against? Anyway, since she's a popular superhero, she's resurrected pretty quickly. The details don't honestly matter. What does matter is that Nat is now dead to the world, giving her a level of anonymity that she hadn't had in a while. Sadly, while not much is done with that, her next series, written by twins Jen and Sylvia Soska, the Twisted Sisters, who pen an excellent tale that for once doesn't involve a huge conspiracy. It's an extremely dark story, possibly even darker than Richard Morgan's work, as this series deals with the Black Widow investigating someone behind a bunch of snuff films in Madripoor. The story takes the time to show the horror of it all, while giving us a grim reminder of the levels of depravity humanity can sink to. Also in this story, Natasha regains some of her empathy back whilst interacting with the victims, which had been missing from her stories for a while. After some shenanigans involving the Space Stone, we next get the miniseries Web of Black Widow, where Natasha is dealing with some memory loss from her resurrection masterminded by one of the villains from Mark Waid's run. It's fine. Not amazing, not terrible, just fine. Currently, Captain Marvel's scribe, Kelly Thompson, is writing Black Widow, which seems to be dealing with implanted memories, idiot villains, and some old friends of Nat in the background hanging out. If you've been watching so far, you've probably noticed these themes come up quite often in any Black Widow series. But Kelly Thompson seems to be interested in actually exploring the emotions behind these themes. Well, let's see how that goes. What have we learned today? Well, for starters, Natasha Romanoff, she's pretty awesome. Also, if you're a supporting character, you should pray that the next creative team really likes you. And finally, comic book characters are going to outlive us all. But hey, that's just how the cookie crumbles. Dos vidanya, and stay well.